Welcome to episode 24 of the Goldenberg Destiny Project. So until now we've been speaking about the period that's covered by the Chumash, by the 5 books of Moses, and last time we were at the end of that period and the beginning of the conquest, which is covered by Sefer Yeshua. Now we can move into the period of the Judges. This period took 400 years, and from the time of the entry to Eretz Yisrael until the appointment of a king in Eretz Yisrael, of Shaul, followed by David, 400 years. What do we know about this period? The Pasuk says a couple of times that Bayom Mahem Ein Melech B'Yisrael Ish HaYosher Be'einav Yasa. In those days there was no king, and every person did as he wanted. So really, there was not only was there no king, there was no formal government. There was no government, there were no government institutions. The country was running on a tribal system. Basically, it was anarchy. Now, there's a difference between anarchy and chaos. Anarchy is a philosophy, a social philosophy, means that you don't want government. Government constricts people, it oppresses people. There's an aversion to having government. The government should not be there to tell you what to do. Every person should be able to do whatever he wants. That is anarchy. Now, if you have an orderly society which runs without a government, then that is, that's the system. The problem with anarchy is that it often descends into chaos. Chaos is confusion and disorder. If there's no government, there's no kind of, no structure, no laws that require you to do certain, that there's no enforcement, then people, even though people maybe should do the right thing, and you should be free to do it, but then people don't do the right thing, and you end up having a lot of crime and a lot of chaos, and people, the society tends to disintegrate. That's chaos. Chaos and anarchy are not synonymous. Now, what happened during the period of Judges, during the Tkufa of the Shoftim, was anarchy with periodic chaos. That characterizes it. The Sfarim that really describe it are Shoftim, Rus, and Shmuel Aleph. But the first book of Shmuel also takes place during the Tkufas of Shoftim until the beginning of the Tkufas of Melachim, of kings. So the first part is also Tkufas HaShoftim. Now, all 3 of these Sfarim, Shoftim and Rus, and Shmuel Aleph, were written by Shmuel HaNavi, by the prophet Samuel, all of them. And when he writes the book of Judges, in the 2nd chapter, he gives you a snapshot of what happened during these entire 400 years. He says that at the end of the conquest, there were pockets of Canaanites and idolaters that remained in the country, and God allowed them to be there as a test. If they would pass the test, then that means that they would not fraternize with them, then they would be protected. If they don't pass the test, then they would fall victim to predatory countries all around them, and then they would cry out to God, and then God would send a shofet, a judge, who would bring them back, and then this is how the cycle would go. Anarchy descending into chaos, back to anarchy, descending into chaos. Now, the way the system worked was during these years was it was tribal. Tribes are related. They're a clan. They're blood related. So that gives them a cohesion. So if you have larger tribes, they can still have that cohesion, but the guidance that the tribes take are from the elders. It could be that he's He's a grandfather or an uncle or a cousin, but he's a kinsman, and if he's the oldest and the wisest, then people tend to follow them or listen to them, but they have no authority. They have no institutionalized ability to tell you what to do. Just people in the tribe generally would defer to the elders of the tribe, and the tribes among each other have alliances, and whenever they need to, they come to each other's alliance. So there was no need for a government, because it would not be chaos from the beginning. There was a tribal system, and then you didn't need a government, there was anarchy. What happened was that for the first 28 years, everything was good. They were living there, everything was, the society was orderly, people were learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, and farming and doing business, and everything was going well. But after a while, they had these Canaanites living among them, and the barriers began to slowly crumble. People, you had neighbors, the Canaanite was a neighbor, and then maybe you borrowed eggs, or you borrowed a hammer or something, and then you spoke to them, you saw, no, not such a bad guy, maybe you could talk to him, and then after a while, maybe you develop some kind of a relationship with them, a friendship, and you say, listen, some of my best friends are Canaanim, and they became, and they related to them in a different way, not as an enemy, but as a neighbor. Now the tzaddikim, the righteous among the Jewish people, they shunned the Canaanim. They had nothing to do with them. But the regular people did not have that strong core of connection to Torah and mitzvahs. They were just regular people. And as they got to know the Canaanim, they became more friendly, and after a while maybe they visited each other in their homes, and after a while they would even join their celebrations, even if they had to go into their temples. They would do that too. And but again, it was gradual, certain barriers falling, until they went in there. And then after they went in there, maybe they would join in the celebrations, and eventually they turned to idolatry. Now, the Gemara says that the Jewish people are pretty smart, and they knew that the idols are meaningless, and the idols are idle. The Gemara says what happened in these celebrations, they had wild orgies, and there was all kinds of, there was drinking, and it was really something not very Jewish going on there, but something very exciting and very tempting. And the reason why they turned to idolatry, because that gave them an excuse to participate in the debauchery that was going on in the temples. So the Hitler, it allowed them to do these things. And then what happened then was that this led to a disintegration of Jewish society. Before, they were unified and strong, and they were loyal to God, and they had a very strong Jewish life, and they learned Torah. And now all of a sudden there's a good big parts of the population are turning to idolatry, and the society was disintegrating. And at these points, they were invaded by neighboring countries that decided this is a good time to attack Israel and to invade. Now we had in 1245, before the Common Era, Kushan of Aram invaded. Now, Aram was an upstart country. It was not a major power. It was just beginning. It was not. It was like a third-rate power. But because Israel was basically in a state of chaos, they took advantage of it, and they attacked and they occupied Israel. And what do? So people turned to God and they cried out. And then Osniel ben Knaz was there. Osniel ben Knaz was one, if not the Gadol Hador, the greatest sage of that period. He was among the greatest sages. He was brilliant. He knew the Torah backwards and forwards. The Gemara says that there are certain forgotten laws which he was able to bring back through extrapolation from other laws. He was able to do this. He was a very great sage. He was also a great personality. And what he did was that he used to go around to different cities and towns and villages, and he used to give the people Musar. He used to rebuke them and inspire them, and he did this for 8 years. He circulated among all the people, and during all this time, the Aramean occupiers, they didn't interfere with them because they didn't see this as a political activity. It wasn't. He never spoke about the revolting against the occupying force. They just spoke about being religious. And the Arameans who occupied Israel did not interfere with the religion, as we've spoken a number of times before. The pagans, the polytheistic pagans, never had a problem with another religion. You know, we have our gods, you have your gods. You go into India, there are thousands of gods. There's room for all the gods. You could have your gods, we'll have our gods. So you want to worship, your God in Israel, fine, do that. They didn't have a problem with that. So when they occupied Israel, they didn't in any way try to interfere with the religion. So here is this old sage with a long white beard and fiery eyes. And he's walking around and he's telling the people, you have to repent and you have to return to God. They didn't see that as a political threat to their occupation. So they didn't interfere with him. So he did this for 8 years. And after 8 years, he was successful. And all the people, repented. And they all returned to God, and they embraced the Torah again, and doing mitzvahs, they embraced it again, and then they were able to become unified again, to coalesce again as a unified country, and then they were able to expel the invaders. Now, this is the process that Shmuel predicted he described in the second chapter of Shoftim, of the book of Judges, and this was a repeated cycle. Now, afterwards, Ehud ben Gera was in 1187 BC. Ehud ben Gera was able to expel Moabites, Ammonites, and Amalekites who decided to attack. In 1137, Shamgar ben Anas was able to expel an incursion of Philistines who were just rising. They weren't really, we're going to get to Philistia later when they come into their own and they become powerful. That's a separate discussion. But at this point, they were not yet the powerful Philistia of the future. And they were but they were still, dangerous, and they were incursions, and they also were able to cause a period of occupation in Israel, and Shamgar ben Anas was able to expel them through the same process. Now, then Devorah the prophetess, was able to expel a Canaanite army. Gideon was able to expel Midianites and Amalekites. Yiftach was able to expel Ammonim and Plishtim also, still in the early stages. And then afterwards there was 25 years of priests, and there were 3 judges during that time. There was Iftzan. Iftzan is Boaz from the book of Ruth. He's the great-grandfather of King David. Then there was Elon, there was Avdon. Now, during this whole period, it's not so clear. I mean, of course, whatever happened, they had Siyata D'Shmaya, that help, from God. But was this cycle that the judges came along and they were able to reinvigorate the people and inspire them and get them to coalesce again? Was that miraculous? I don't think so. There's no mention that it was miraculous. It's just that God sent them a judge. That part says God will send a judge, and that he will rise from among the people, and that judge will inspire the people and bring them back to God. That is what, okay. Now, at the end of this period, they faced a threat. And this is 300 years this went on. There were 400-year period of the judges. This is the first 300 years. At the end of this period, they faced Philistia. And at that point, Philistia had already become a powerful country, and the threat was much greater than any threat they'd ever faced before. Okay, so we will discuss Philistia in the next episode. I'd like to invite you to visit me at rabbireiman.com and explore all my works, both completed and still in progress, and kindly take the opportunity to lend your support on the participant page. Thank you very much, and be well.